All right, so everyone, let me take a moment here and introduce Dane. So Dane Kuttler, as she herself puts it, writes and cooks in Northampton, Massachusetts. Her first book of poems, And Who by Nobody's Son, was released on Choose the Sword Press in 2016. She has toured nationally 3 times, won the Best of Blood and Thunder Award for a poem about hospice care, and has performed her work in concert halls, libraries, and living rooms. And I should add that I know Dane from our days at the Ravenna Kibbutz, which was a Jewish intentional community and urban kibbutz in Seattle's Ravenna neighborhood. And that means we grew some of our food, but not all of our food. It existed from 2007 to 2012. I encourage anyone who's interested to check out the nifty Wikipedia article on the Ravenna Kibbutz. It's terribly out of date. So the kibbutz was also featured in both mainstream Seattle media, most notably the Seattle Times, and international Jewish media, by which I mean the Forward. So today's program will focus on how Dane, as a 21st century conservative Jewish poet, both embraces and transforms tradition in her work, particularly as it relates to Exodus and other Pesach themes, because here we are days from Pesach. So without further ado, I give you Dane Kuttler.
Thank you so much, Neil. I think the only correction, not a correction, but when I talk about the kibbutz, I just tell people it was a commune, because it was.
The motto or the slogan was, "Would it kill you to find a nice Jewish commune?"
Yes.
So
that was our motto, and it was great. And I absolutely treasured my time in the kibbutz. And I love that so many of us who lived there have gone on to make our way in the Jewish world, doing a variety of different things. I understand you guys are going to get to meet some of our other comrades from there in the coming months, which is really exciting, and you will learn a lot from them. So without further ado, I'm just going to jump right into this. This is how I open every Seder that I lead, and it goes like this. Everybody trickles in, they're sitting down, everybody's kibitzing, I have no way of calling the room to order, and then I slam my hand on the table and I go, listen up! Once upon a time, we were slaves, which means other people told us what to do and when to do it, how to do it, and especially what not to do. Once upon a time, there was a pharaoh who wanted never to be forgotten, like everyone does, so he made us build him a mountain of greatness, and so we remember. Because once upon a time, we were almost forgotten. Once upon a time, we built greatness while blood ran down our backs. Once upon a time, we promised ourselves we'd never be forgotten, like everyone does. So we put our stories deep in our tongues and started to tell them. Once upon a time, we decided to build a mountain of stories and a plate full of reminders so that we would never be forgotten. Once upon a time, I was as small as you. We were all small, eating stories for dinner and sticking them deep in our tongues. Once upon a time, my parents promised their parents that they would always remember, and now I want you to promise me that you will remember too. That is my sort of kickoff reading at the beginning of my Haggadah. I think of Passover as being like the liturgist's gateway. It is easily one of the most customizable things in all of Judaism. It's one of the most flexible things in all of Judaism. It's ripe for reinterpretation. Indeed, we're commanded, right, to reinterpret it, to feel as though we ourselves went through the land of Mitzrayim. And so it's an invitation, right? A Haggadah is a living document when it's done right, in my opinion. And I grew up between two different Seders, like many people. There was the first night, which we called the fun one, and the second night, which we called Dad's. And my father, like so many before him, and so many in his era and in mine, had this idea that only a certain way of doing a Seder counted, right? And that entailed the leader sitting at the head of the table and reading a whole lot. And we would go around the table and we would read things, but the translation was like 80 years old. And it wasn't particularly engaging, and there wasn't a whole lot of diversion, right? But it felt as though we checked the boxes. And I will not lie, I grew up very steeped in this, right? Very indoctrinated in this. I needed things to count. I needed things to feel like they counted. I always needed a dad-like Seder in my celebrations, right? But when I was in high school, I went to an amazing pluralistic Sunday school, a Jewish Sunday school, all through high school that offered a class on writing Jewish poetry. And around Pesach, we got to writing about Pesach because, you know, the teacher was thematic. And that was the first time I started writing Pesach poems that could be incorporated into the Seder. And from there, it just kind of skyrocketed. By the end of high school, I was writing my family's Haggadah and revising it every year. I did it through college. I helped write a Haggadah for a good friend of mine and got to experience the collaboration on a Haggadah for the first time, which was amazing. And then that eventually morphed into writing other kinds of liturgical interpretation. And that is the bulk of what makes up my work now. And having been raised conservative, I always have had this deep-rooted sense of it's got to count, it's got to check these boxes, and it's got to say these words, and it's not Pesach if you don't say with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm at least 4 times, right? And learning how you can bake that sense of meaning into what you're doing, that sense of integrity and authenticity into what you're writing, without necessarily parroting the words I grew up with, right? Where do you draw that line between meaning, tradition, and interpretation? How do they play with each other?
So Jewish.
So Jewish. So one of the other things that happens every year is every April, which is National Poetry Month, I write 30 poems in 30 days. And what often happens in April that might serve as inspiration for writing poetry? So a lot of these poems came out of my April exercise, writing 30 poems in 30 days. And this one is called Chametz and Other Ownerless Things. And it's derived from any chametz or leaven that is in my possession, which I have not seen and have not removed and do not know about, should be annulled and become ownerless like dust of the earth. Everybody knows this phrase a little bit in some fashion. Yes, this is, I got all the chametz out of my house, and if I didn't, it doesn't count. Right. This bread, these waffles, the crumbs stuck between floorboards, not mine. The bourbon sold to an unknowing neighbor who thought he was just paying for the Wi-Fi. Next, the hidden ones, vanilla extract, powdered sugar, all that quietly hide their grains, the hypothetical threat of an uprising, banished. The rice we kept this year, and all those beans, the clear noodles made of sweet potato starch could stay. One by one, we deliberated, playing at rabbinic games. But who could say we cared any less?
Nice.
As the daughter of one Ashki and one Sephardi, I grew up keeping, in my younger years, Ashkenazi, and then my parents, as they put it, chilled out a little. We started keeping Sephardi and eating beans, rice, and corn, eating kitniot. As an adult, it's one of my more rigid deferences to tradition that I switch back and forth every year.
Hypothetically, if someone didn't know what kitniot are,
rice, beans, and corn.
That's what they are. Yeah.
Yep, rice, beans, and corn. The grains that are not grains. All right. So some of the poems that I'm going to follow with here are specific parts of the Seder, and some are a little bit more commentary on some of the characters that we meet in the Seder. So this is a very liturgical one. This is my take on the 10 plagues. Dam. The water ran thick and red with silt, undrinkable. We clenched fists of mud and cursed the drought, the desert. It didn't seem like revenge. Svadea. When there's no water and the frogs spawn under the parching sun, you begin to wonder what God is experimenting with your sanity. Kinim. Nobody spoke of the lice, but smeared mud and garlic under our robes, made excuses in bed. Arov. And then came the swarm which carried Dever, It must have come from the bugs, the swarms of mites in the field. They must have carried some disease. The air was thick with buzzing and rotting cattle. Shechin. And then it came for us. Barad. Like tiny stones flung at us from angry gods, people stopped praying and pawed at the sand for shelter. Arbe. And then we starved, watching the winter stores wither under the sharp hum of locusts. Choshech. We were almost grateful for the blindness when it came. Makat bechorot. Until the first wails snatched the darkness from us. And then there was the sun, glaring at each dead boy. I remember, too, how the Israelite women cried, watching us bury them. This is called Magid, or Exodus. Don't think, run, don't think, move. Squint into the cloud of sand and shouting, ignore the sun blistering on your shoulders, blink, 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 don't stop. Shoulder the dough and keep going. The gates will only be open for as long as we hold them, so go, so go, so go. The children are barefoot, go. Who will care for the cat? There's too much we can't take with us, too much of ourselves that won't follow us out, go. Don't think, don't stop. Fling yourself into the avalanche. The road to freedom isn't paved with anything. You clear it as you go.
Whew.
It's time to go. You've got two hands. What do you grab? Neil.
The cats.
The cats. Judy, what do you grab? Your phone. Yeah. Rosalind, what do you grab? You're muted,
Got on
but
mute.
I got it.
Yeah. My purse with my whole life in it.
Yep. Adela, what do you grab?
My shoes.
Shannon, what do you grab?
Drive that has all my photos on it.
Laura, what do you grab?
My coat.
Don't think. Karen, what do you grab?
My blender.
Francis, what do you grab? Francis, you want to tell us what you want to grab? You're muted.
Not sure.
Not sure. Right. It's hard to know, right? So there's always a part of the Seder where we talk about what is on the Seder plate, right? There's like the explanation of the thing. So this is some of my takes on those. This is karpas. As much comfort as cliche, karpas nonetheless bites back. A scrappy, grumbling green, demanding more rumination than anything so tender-looking should. Eat your parsley, your celery. If you're far enough north, make it an onion, raw. Dip it in salt water to temper the hope. Karpas is the sinewy side of spring, the toughness required to bloom. Maror. Your tongue knows fire. Your throat knows how to swallow the bitterness as part of the story, a stop on the way to the sweet stuff, counterpoint to all that sorrow salt. Let it choke you just a moment. Feel your breath come through a freshly blazed body, a scorch mark scar burned again in the name of remembering. Charoset, a recipe. Sticky and unblessed, a binding, the hush and scrape of an apple flayed against puckered tin and browned under breath after measured breath. A grit of walnuts, fallen and crushed. The requisite gulp of wine to numb the pain, to sharpen the sweet. Dates, if your blood holds salt and sun. Raisins, if your bones call home when it rains. I also grew up with two kinds of charoset, one from each of my grandmothers. And to this day, I typically make the Sephardic kind. Largely because most other people make the Ashkenazi kind, so I can count on somebody bringing the apples and walnut version to my Seder. But my favorite way to do it is with dried sour cherries. That's my secret ingredient.
You should send us the recipe after.
Bold of you to assume there's a recipe.
You should send us some kind of improvised list of ingredients after.
That's more like it.
Yeah.
The next 3 poems, a couple of which are very short, one slightly longer, are about characters that we meet. So the first one is Nachshon. Anybody know who Nachshon is? No? Okay. So Moshe is standing at the edge of the Red Sea, right? But like doesn't know what to do because there's this ocean in front of him, right? And so the Midrash goes, the story goes, that down a ways, down the shore is this old guy named Nachshon who decides, like, to hell with this. I'm going in, right? I'm not dying at the hands of the Egyptians. And he dives in. And at the moment he dives in that leap of literal faith, God splits the sea.
Wow.
Nachshon is a little profane, so just heads up there. Moshe waits at the water for a miracle, maybe a bridge, maybe a boat, prays with his walking stick, pleads in a voice no one can hear over the water. Down the beach, Nachshon thinks, fuck that. You want a miracle? Let this desert-born boy jump, and you make him a swimmer. Eliyahu, the mysterious invisible prophet that makes his way into all the houses. Eliyahu wanders the streets looking for open doors. Eliyahu promises to settle all the arguments once he's had a minute to sit and a drink. Eliyahu knows the inside of your house and thinks last year's Merlot was better. Eliyahu was never found dead. Eliyahu hates his theme song. Eliyahu thinks the only thing between him and resurrection is another open door. The last of the character poems that we're going to do is Miriam. This is Miriam, daughter of Yocheved. Miriam is a ballsy backbeat, a clash of tambourine and quick thinking, the hero who comes too early in the story and only speaks to God off camera. She's a mouthy bitch, that Miriam, the leader of the girl gang. When they dance, the seas shake. Mothers fall to their knees. While Moses is off performing magic tricks and bargaining, Miriam shouts a litany of curses in the vague direction of heaven, thinking, maybe I'm coming for all their gods. Miriam brought the blood. Miriam, a hailstorm. Miriam closed her eyes and blinded half a country. Miriam walks behind Moses with a switchblade in her palm, letting it clang against her bangles, sounding the alarm.
Nice.
Yeah. Alternate character interpretation is like probably one of my favorite parts of Passover. Because it's also really, really traditional, right? Like from the beginning, from the time the Seder was written in the rabbinic scholarship era, right? The rabbis were like questioning Moshe from day one. They were like, this dude was raised in Pharaoh's palace. He has an awakening, right? He believes in God when God presents himself to him, right? He follows the mission. And then he proceeds to do a whole bunch of like really boneheaded things, right? He hits rocks and he doubts and he goes up the mountain and he leaves people to build a freaking idol, right? He screws up left and right. And I love this about Moshe, right? I love this about him because he's so incredibly human. And wouldn't you be, right? I think this is part of the story that we don't really pay attention to enough, where he's born and raised in extraordinary privilege, right? In places where slavery as a concept isn't even discussed. It's just a way of life, right? It's just part of the scenery, part of the background. There's no critical theory here, right? There's no critique. There's nobody in Moses's circles who is saying, this is messed up. And so Moses has his awakening, right? But we never really get inside his head during that part of the story. We don't know if he is demanding his people's freedom because God told him to, or because he knows it's right. And that's complicated. And then as soon as he gets out, right, God stops talking. God stops talking. God splits a sea. God brings forth fresh water. God makes food fall from the sky. But there's no more conversation until we get to Mount Sinai. And when we get to Mount Sinai, we're not really privileged to we're not privy to the conversation, right? There's no more, Moses, take off your shoes for you are standing on holy ground. It's like very directed in your face, and we don't get that. And so it always made sense to me that Moshe kind of weakens the minute he leaves Mitzrayim, the minute he leaves everything he grew up with, the minute he leaves everything that gave him power and a sense of self, right? No wonder he screws up. And how? And no wonder in the end that his punishment is that he doesn't get to go into the land. He's stuck. He's literally stuck in the wilderness for eternity, right? That's what he gets. And there's something I love about that message that I haven't fully parsed out in a poem yet, right? Because there's this feeling that, like, those of us who grew up with the most, right, who have the most to lose in these scenarios, right, there is a good chance we don't get to see the promised land. There is a good chance that there is too much of this powerful, destructive, ignorant force that exists that we may just be too boneheaded to make it through the desert. That is some radical stuff for the rabbis to be writing about. The rabbis who were like entrenched in their own insane power drama, right? Jewish scholars are a dramaful bunch of guys. Okay, they have a lot of political juggling with one another. There's, debates about whose school is this and whose interpretation is valid in that, and who has more, integrity when it comes to their interpretation, right? There's like all of that jockeying around and all of that nonsense. So what do? They take a guy who was raised with all the power and they put him in the story and they make him a bonehead.
So do you think that, even though we don't get inside Moses's head in terms of his motivation at key moments, does he still strike you as one of the more complex heroes in the Torah? Because there are a number of them, that are, but this trajectory you're describing is just so interesting and tragic in a way.
It is. Moshe's story is tragic. That's the way we don't read it on Passover, right? On Passover, we stop at the getting out point. It's a very good ending for the movie, right? Moshe doesn't really hit this struggly bit until much later, right? Much later in the story. And we don't commemorate it, right? We have Shavuot, where we talk about the going up to the mountain and the receiving of the Torah, right? That gets its own holiday in a month and a half. Right? So we celebrate that moment, but we don't really have, any way of commemorating kind of the real end of the journey. And that's because the real end of the journey is kind of anticlimactic, right? There's no Red Sea splitting. There's just like, we crested the hill and there it is, the Green Valley, right? Like,
what a strange narrative structure.
Yeah, we're gonna go there now, and Moshe, you're gonna sit on a rock, I guess, right? There's something incredibly tragic about it, and yet there's a certain feeling. The rabbis they go through a lot of pain to say he deserved it, right? He questioned. He didn't obey. He hit that rock. They built that cow in his name, right? What I'm most curious about is that you don't really, in my scholarship, which admittedly is not comprehensive, and if I studied more, I might find out, but I never found out what happened to his brother, Aaron. Aaron was kind of the believer from the get-go. He was a lot less doubtful, right? And had his own struggles in the story, right? But belief was not one of them. And I don't know if he gets to go. I think he may die in the desert. because he is significantly older than Moses. We know that. But the question of how the rabbis treat somebody, right, who comes to a realization but isn't quite able to fully let go of the damaged, broken world that raised him. And that's the same is true for the Israelites too, right? They're the ones who built the freaking cow. What better symbol of the damaged, broken world that raised them? They're not ready. And that's why God makes it into a 40-year parade. I remember being younger and thinking, so many people are going to have to die before the righteous can take over. Right? I think this is like a really common thing to feel when you're 14.
Yes, sure.
Right? And the older I get, the more I am deeply aware of the ways in which I hold up this world that we live in, this damaged, broken world we live in, and how close I am to the edge of being one of the ones who needs to die before the righteous can take over. And
Right.
Passover really lets that hit home. It gets worse on Yom Kippur, but like Passover is kind of where it starts creeping into the back of my head and being like, would you have been ready to leave? Would you have just tried to stay and cope and make the best of a bad situation? Would someone have had to drag you by the hair into the like incredible crush and mob pit that was the Exodus, right? Would you have bitched about it the entire way to the ocean? Oh, sorry, Judy. Yeah, question.
Actually, since you're on this topic, this reminded me of the couple of pieces that struck me the most were the Exodus poem around there, because I immediately thought of immigrants in general, especially since now we have more at our border. Again, you know, it's and anyway, so what it takes to be forced to leave, this, you know, last minute hurry up, you know, and you can't take much, and so the dire circumstances that are afflicting so many people even today, you know, all over the world, that force them to flee their homes. So those poems just struck me the most because of what's been in the news, you know, everywhere around the world, all the different crises. So I just thought I would say thank you for those poems. Okay. And all of them, but okay.
Thank you, Judy. And you're absolutely right. The last edition of my Haggadah, which was 2018, was the last Seder that I led. The theme of my Haggadah was migration and immigration. And the question about what do you take with you is one I always ask at my Seder. Yeah. I mean, it gets you there. You know, Passover is in so many ways about what it takes to get you there. There's 2 more poems that I'd like to read to you guys if we have time. Do we have time?
We have time.
All right. So y'all know the 4 children, right? And this comes before the story. It's one of the more esoteric pieces of rabbinical commentary that's made it into the mainstream, right? And it's this like grand metaphor for things. But I wrote this one specifically for my migration-based Haggadah. The wise child spent 3 days trying to improvise hair ties out of strips of a plastic blanket when she saw the mats forming on her baby sister's head. She stopped asking questions on the 4th day. On the 6th day, the social worker told the couple with the dog how obedient she was. No trouble. She keeps her questions where they choke her. Where is my sister? Lives behind every single smile. I think I've been kidnapped. Hovers dangerously close to her teeth. To her we say, someone will do the right thing sooner or later. Not me, not today, but someone. The wicked child was supposed to get out of juvenile detention, but no one was ready to take him. Shelter beds were full and no one wanted the 15-year-old with a record. To him we say, do you regret your life enough to end it yet? The simple child spends up to 4 hours a day in a carpeted closet while an elementary school teacher's aide holds the door shut and promises he can come out when he shows he can behave. She put him in there when he refused to take his coat off. To him we say, Is our children learning yet? The child who does not know how to ask clutches a stuffed monkey. In front of her, a child notices the sun catcher in the window and begins to dance through the rainbow, her hands whirling in perfect wings. The child who does not know how to ask holds her breath as her colleague steps in and claps the dancing child's hands over her head, pinning them and hissing, "Quiet hands." The child who does not know how to ask muscles her scream into a smile and walks away. To her we say, "You're getting so much better."
Jeez. That's intense.
Passover can be really intense.
Mhm.
Passover can be really, really, really intense. Judy.
Got on mute, Judy. Got on mute.
I'm trying, sorry, my computer's slow. So do you happen to have these poems in a book that we can purchase?
I'm so glad you asked. And the answer is no. I'm really embarrassed about that. The answer is no, I don't have these. They have mostly appeared in my Haggadahs over the years and also in the various collection on Facebook, because I always write my 30-30 poems on Facebook. So what I'm going to do is I do have them all in a document here. And as a thank you to all of you for coming, I'm going to send them to Neil and he can get them out to you guys. If you would like some copies, if you would like to add any of them to your own Seders, you have my full permission. I'm so glad that that you've come to listen to them, and I really appreciate it. But what I will tell you, and this is like a slight bit of an awkward segue, but hang on one second. Gotta grab the books that actually exist. I thought they were in reach, but they were not. So I said that writing Haggadahs was the start of doing liturgical stuff. And that has grown into a couple of books. And these are the two that are in print right now. So this is called The Social Justice Warrior's Guide to the High Holy Days. Roz is nodding because she's badass and she knows it.
I think we have used some of the poems at our High Holy Day services.
That's amazing. Every year I hear of a couple more congregations that have used it, and I'm just like,
yes.
It's very exciting. And then this one is the Book of Solace. And this one, as you may guess from the name and the look of it, it follows the Jewish grief cycle. So it's kind of a step-by-step, chapter by chapter poetic path through death and grief. And these two are both available on my website, which I'm going to go ahead and put here in the chat.
Well, you're a very talented poet, I will say.
Well, thank you.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate your sharing the poems from today, because there are a couple of them that we're having a congregational Seder Sunday evening, and there are still options, for inserting some additional readings. And so I'm very excited about receiving that text.
Good. I'm glad. So I do want to finish out with not Passover. I just want to give you guys a little bit of a taste of these books, so you can decide if you want them. So again, this book follows Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Shmini Atzeret, and Simchat Torah. And I'm just going to read you the introduction to it, actually. It's called How to Read This Book. Bring it to the river and read it with your feet in the water. Slip it between the pages of your prayer book and find it during the moments of silence. Read one of the passages aloud to open your next activist meeting. Keep it in the pile of books next to your bed. Fall asleep on the couch with it on your chest. Stuff it into the cracks of your heart. Braid and undo the fringes repetitively, as your father permitted you to do when you were small. Mark it with pen, with pencil, with tears. This is a guide to the art of beginning again. Begin.
That is lovely.
Thank you. That's Warrior's Guide. And then I want to read you a little snippet from Book of Solace. Book of Solace was written in like a really intense personal and political moment. It was written in the summer of 2016. And in that moment, or in the moments that this was happening, you know, Trump got the Republican nomination to be president. The Pulse shooting happened in Florida, where a gunman killed 40 some odd people in a nightclub. A beloved Jewish house called Kavod that holds a lot of cultural DNA with the Ravenna kibbutz burned to the ground that summer. Nobody was hurt, but there was just an incredible load of grief that summer. And then on top of it, my mom was diagnosed with cancer and it was bad. So it was like really, I was having a moment. But in the wake of what we've been seeing over the last week with the shootings in Atlanta and yesterday in Colorado, I'm going to read you a couple of pieces here from a section called For Those Killed in Gunfire. And God says, I promise you this, the ones who die afraid are the first to find peace in the world to come. They come hurried, unexpected, desperately sniffing at the bits of earth still under their fingernails. They never wanted to leave you. The only solace I can offer is this: your memories of them will fade last. And God says, after the first night, when the day comes, stubbornly new, insistent and bracing, and you are still alive, you still live, burning in the furious truth that this is not the last time. There will always be a next time. Next time it might be you. Hallelujah anyway. Sing anyway. Dance anyway. Love anyway. Fight anyway. Love anyway. This one borrows a bit from Passover liturgy. One of the commentary rabbis in the Haggadah says, whoever does not complete the following things has not fulfilled the duties of Passover. Does that sound familiar to a lot of you? It's the passage right before we explain all the things on the Seder plate.
Mhm.
It's Rabban Gamliel. That's who says it. And God says, whoever does not complete the following three things in the wake of tragedy has not fulfilled their duty, namely, caring for body and soul, contributing to community efforts to mourn and repair, and speaking truth in the most influential ways, whether at the gates or in the very ears of power. And God says to love each other may require more discomfort than you're ready for. To love each other, you may have to interrogate and scrub at the most embedded, complacent, defeated pieces of yourself. To love each other, you may have to call down your justifications, to haul back your excuses, to calm your snapping, snarling fears. Anything less than showing up as you've been called to show up is not love. And God says, do not be swallowed by the enormity of the world's grief, the pain of everywhere, everywhere, everywhere. There is always a place to do the work of healing. Not everything is lost. And God says, never once have I answered your pleas of why. I only answer one thing. What do we do next? So that all is from Book of Solace.
Thank
I
you.
have that book, Dane.
You have this one?
I have to have it.
Oh, you have to. You can get it. It is yours. So they're both available on my website. I have a sliding scale for pricing that goes all the way down to 0. People have been incredibly generous and very honest with their ability to pay so that I have a robust fund available for those who cannot. And, if you would like either of those, I get them shipped out within 2 weeks usually. I am the packaging and distribution center, so sometimes it takes me a minute. But I will get them to you. I also have them both in a PDF form, which we didn't do digital versions for a really long time because I really wanted them to exist only in hardback so that people could use them in synagogue. Again, that's like one place where my traditional roots really stuck, and like I got stuck there. And then somebody said to me, listen, if you're vision impaired and you use a screen reader to hear things, then you need a digital version. And that's what got me through the stuck. I was like, all right, here we go. We have one now. So if you need to zoom in or have a large print version or use a screen reader, there are PDFs available. You can just let me know and I will get that to you.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I have to say it's delightful to have you here with us, and it's so, it took the events of this situation we're in on a large scale for events like this one to happen, and so this is a silver lining, to be sure, but it's also just a comfort to me that no matter how far people go geographically or otherwise away from us, they're still within reach, and I'm so grateful that that you are within reach, even across the country.
Hang on, your mom had a question though.
Yes.
I do. I'm on your website, and so I'm wondering if you can say a little bit about what is indicated as your inaugural book, and Who by Nobody's Son. Say a little bit about that, and
Sure.
Also about the title.
Yes, actually, thank you for asking, because I put a lot of thought into that. So, and Who by Nobody's Son, so like a lot of first books, its binding theme is like really profound. It's called All of the Best Poems I Wrote Up to That Point. That was my first book. But because human beings are creatures of theme and habit, and we like making meaning, there are several running themes in it. And one of them is family history and Jewishness. One of them is queerness and the development of a queer identity. One of them, and then part of the backdrop was actually the Boston Marathon shooting.
Wow.
That was kind of the big world event that was happening in the moment when I was editing and drafting that book. So I was really interested in questions of owning and disowning. So I didn't come out for several years after I knew I was queer, not because I was afraid of being literally disowned, right? That was luckily a fear that I never harbored. That was something I knew I was safe from. But also looking around at all of the many, many people who were disowned by their families upon coming out. But disowning as a certain feeling of not of us, right? Maybe tolerated, but never accepted. Those were things that I was really afraid of. And then questions of heredity and Jewishness, how stuff gets passed down, who we call our own. And then there were these questions with the Boston Marathon bombers, right? Do we claim them as our own? Are they Americans? Are they white? Are they Caucasian, right? Because literally they are Caucasian from the region that we call Caucasus, right? And these were questions that were really big in the cultural conversation at the time. So the line in Who by Nobody's Son actually is ripped from a poem in the book that follows a really familiar piece of Yom Kippur liturgy and or Leonard Cohen song, and Who by Fire, and Who by Water. And then the last lines of that, I believe, are Who by Everyone's Father, and Who by Nobody's Son.
Oh, wow.
So thank you for asking, because I freaking love that title. Getting to talk about it is a gift. So thank you.
It's a striking title, and thank you for explaining it.
Yeah, writing these books has been a huge gift. The Warrior's Guide one was very much a collaboration between me and my editor, and was a really phenomenal experience. It came together in 5 weeks. Like 5 weeks from the time I wrote the first draft of the first piece until it was printed. I mean, it was intense. The Book of Solace was really different. I mostly wrote it by myself. in a much more solitary experience, but I was hanging on to the structure of the morning cycle, right? I was like, okay, I have to have pieces that address Shiva. I have to have pieces that address unveiling, right? I have to have the pieces that address Kiddush and Yahrzeit. And those became touchstones that really allowed me to grapple my way through it without that more collaborative force. And Who by Nobody's Son was a sort of multi-way collaboration. And actually the thing I'm really the most proud of is that all of my grandparents got to see it published. And there are a lot of poems in there about and to my Sephardic side and my Sephardic heritage. And really the best gift of that book was my Sephardic grandmother calling me up and saying, I love the book because you wrote it and I love everything you do, but I want to love it because I understand it. And she and I had phone calls for probably 6 weeks, where every week we would just go through 2 or 3 poems, and I gave her like a college level seminar in like picking apart poetry and teaching her how to read poems and how poems are built and constructed, and like little bits about language and structure and meter and rhythm and theme and all this like really cool stuff. And it was so great. It was so good.
Beautiful. That's beautiful.
It's a huge gift.
That would have been a fly on the wall.
I actually, so I wrote some of like the more hilarious moments and really poignant observations and posted them on Facebook at the time. And I love it because of Facebook's feature where you can see what you've posted in the past. What I love about it especially is that in that 6-week period when I was posting these, it happens to fall now during her Yahrzeit. So like, this is how I get to commemorate her Yahrzeit every year, is like reliving one of the best things we ever did and like the best times we ever had.
That's beautiful.
And remembering that. So like, hey man, I am all about digital Yahrzeit. You know, this is like, there are ways to make this really, really flippin' meaningful. So.
Well, thank you so much for your time and your talent, and yeah, and for meeting some of my crew here in Spokane as well.
Yes, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you, Adela. Thank you all so much.
Wonderful, really wonderful. Yeah.
This was a total pleasure. And anytime you guys want a spontaneous mid-afternoon poetry reading, you know, like pandemic, no pandemic, whatever, as long as y'all are willing to get on Zoom, I am more than happy to. We can do this for all the holidays if you want.
I would
Great.
love it.
That's yeah, that's an offer we may take you up on.
Tap me during high holiday season. We'll make it happen.